what if we could dissect evil? That line of dialogue really represents like the provocative question at the heart of Nuremberg, a historical drama about the Nuremberg trials, in which the defeated Nazi leaders were put on trial before the world for their crimes against humanity. And with like anti-Semitism on the rise again in a very polarized world, it's a film that's sure to strike a cultural nerve. It's a timely film, but is it a good film? I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So I will say right from the start that I think this movie is really, really good. It's long and I think challenging to watch at times, but also one of, if not the best films of the year so far. I think elevated by really excellent writing, several outstanding acting performances. I think Nuremberg is a captivating and like timely exploration on the nature of evil and the men who commit it. Now, as we all know, people today are often quick to bemoan like the oversaturation of comic book films or just empty spectacle in Hollywood. I think to that end, Nuremberg is a welcome like counterbalance with an emphasis on intimate human drama. As with recent films like Oppenheimer and Conclave, this is a total like actors talking type of movie because most of the film unfolds as a series of like captivating dialogues. And despite a relative absence of any brisk action or really just any action at all, the film's dialogue is super engrossing and does manage to build like a lot of dramatic tension. I don't think Nuremberg quite generates the same sense of like energy as films like Oppenheimer or Conclave, which both were nominated or won the Best Picture Academy Award, so no shame there. But I think despite like a 2.5-hour runtime and fairly like methodical pacing, I was never restless or like bored. It's definitely a slow movie, but I was always invested and like eager to see what would happen next. Now, like a dialogue-driven film like this can really only work if it has the actors who can elevate those scenes. And this film definitely does. I think the entire cast is solid, but the primary trio of Russell Crowe, Michael Shannon, and Rami Malek are just excellent. I think it really is a testament to the strength of this ensemble cast that I don't think any of them really like steal the movie, but the film also never loses momentum when it does switch between those storylines. Although I will say, I think of the trio, I think Russell Crowe arguably delivers like the standout performance, adding very delicate nuance to the character of Hermann Göring, who was Hitler's right-hand man. He is able to sort of find humanity in a man who was an unquestionable, like, moral monster. And he's just super captivating every time he's on screen. The film is also, I think, a showcase in just excellent writing. The dialogue is crisp and interesting, even managing to find some, like, humor amid its very serious subject matter. Michael Shannon, in particular, just has a really, like, dry line delivery that just constantly made me chuckle. And other than, like, a more direct call to action in the final scene of this film, most of the dialogue is left pretty raw and like allowed to linger with unresolved tension, which I just really loved. I think a scene in which Robert Jackson, which is Michael Shannon's character, visits the Pope to ask for the church's support in the trials really exemplifies this, because the verbal exchange like between those two men doesn't leave either as a clear winner. And the way the scene is written makes like a strong case for the superiority of the Christian worldview and like the flaws of Jackson's more atheistic worldview, which I'll get into a bit more in just a second. But Jackson also lands a powerful blow, about the hypocrisy, like inconsistency within the church. And it's such a rarity in like a Hollywood film like this to explore these sort of philosophical and like theological classes like between worldviews without the filmmaker putting their own thumb down to like tip the scale. And I really appreciated that. Nuremberg is a historical drama, but it's presented with the conviction that it has something timely to say to modern audiences. The movie itself ends with a quote from R.G. Collingwood, which reads, "The only clue to what man can do is what man has already done." Anti-Semitism is on the rise once again in America, and this film's closing scene, which is like an impassioned monologue from Malek's character, frames this film as like a warning and call to action. I should say too that this film doesn't pull any punches in making audiences like confront the atrocities committed against the Jewish people, just as the characters like within the trial must confront it. To that end, like the original videos depicting the horrors of the concentration camps that were played during like the real life trials are included in this film, like unedited and unembellished. And the footage is obviously just horrific to watch, but also a profound moment, I think, where like the line between fiction and reality melds together. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, by my count, there were about 15 profanities, starting with the letters S and H and B, as well as 5 uses of JC and 3 of GD. As far as violence, there are several dead bodies that are seen from men that have committed suicide, including one man with a rope around his neck and a cloth in his mouth, and another who has taken a cyanide pill. You also see several men who are executed by hanging, where you just sort of see their legs dangling and they do urinate themselves. But like I said earlier, the most visceral moment of violence does come in that footage of the concentration camps, where you just see countless dead or dying bodies, many of which are naked. As far as sexuality, there are some brief moments of male nudity in the concentration camp footage, although as you might expect, it's not at all shown in any kind of sexual way. You do have a man that makes one allusion to rape, and then another one sort of asked by a doctor what a series of pictures look like. A man repeatedly answers a vagina. As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface, this movie really is just all about the nature of evil, because much of the film centers on characters just trying to come to grips with the evil acts committed by the Nazis. Because early on, you have Malik's sort of psychologist character musing, what sets these men apart from all others? What enabled them to commit the crimes that they did? How did people become like that? We actually have a shot to figure it out, to find out what makes the Germans different from us. And yet, as this film shows, what if the difference between them and the Nazis is not as wide as they assume? To Robert H. Jackson, which is, again, is Michael Shannon's character, evil really is just a matter of laws and political policy, and thus evil is to be confronted primarily in the courthouse. But during sort of that encounter with the Pope that I mentioned earlier, these assumptions are challenged. And the Pope notes, nobody denies that men are evil, but an eye for an eye is not the answer. And he goes on to say to Jackson, are you a religious man, and yet you call yourself a justice? If you sit long enough in the judgment of others, you come to believe that the laws of man outweigh the laws of God. And when pressed to state what he actually does believe, Jackson responds, I believe in man, in our capacity to save ourselves from men like the Nazis. I believe this to be a good act, to which the Pope finally counters, one so good, you must circumvent your own law to achieve it. And it's just a fascinating bit of dialogue. I think despite being a courtroom drama, Nuremberg suggests that the man-made and enforced laws are not the ultimate answer to overcoming evil. After all, if men are innately evil, then those that make and enforce the law are themselves evil men who must be regulated. And the film does have a clear message that individuals and I think society as a whole should and are even morally obligated to stand against acts of evil, but it also exposes just the impossibility of the ultimate success of this earthly approach. And this, I think the film is consistent with a Christian worldview. The Bible is clear that we are indeed called to fight injustice and defend the vulnerable. At the same time, if evil is a fundamentally spiritual problem, then only a perfect spiritual being can bring about ultimate justice, such as James 4:12, which says, there's only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy, but who are you to judge your neighbor? And at the end of the film, Douglas Kelly is finally forced to conclude that there really isn't much difference between the Nazis and everyone else. The acts of the Nazis were unfathomable, and although the film doesn't refer to scripture itself, I think it does echo Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So in the end, I think Nuremberg is a really powerful film. It may not have enough narrative energy like Oppenheimer, or just the cinematic beauty of a film like Conclave to break into sort of the Academy Award conversation. But I think whether it's recognized with shiny trophies or not, this is easily one of the best films of the year. It's a film that reminds moviegoing audiences that you don't really need flashy action or a recognizable IP branding to experience a gripping and emotionally rich stories. I believe that the greatest stories are those that honestly capture the human experience. And in Nuremberg, we see humanity at its ugly worst, but we're also summoned to rise up and fight for a more beautiful tomorrow. But hey, I would love to hear what you think. This is going to be a film I think a lot of people have maybe divided opinions on, so don't be shy, be respectful, but jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation on it. If you haven't listened to, encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a collider, because that's other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. Would love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thanks for watching, stay safe, and continue to collide with your world for Christ.